You're listening to Real Investor Radio with Craig Fuhr and Jack Bevere, where we cover advanced real estate investing topics to help you stay ahead of the curve in your real estate investing business. Well, hey everyone, welcome back to Real Investor Radio. I'm Craig Fuhr, joined again by Jack Bevere. Jack, how are you today?
Doing great this morning, Craig. How you doing, man?
Well, I'm excited for today's guest, and we got a couple news stories that I'd like to cover quickly. So we'll just go ahead and jump in for the listeners. So, Jack, the NAR settlement, man, everyone's talking about it. All my Facebook investor friends, seeing a lot on social media. We're getting calls from borrowers who are specifically asking what our feelings are on it. So, I pulled just a couple. There's no lack of news stories about it, but quickly, there was a lawsuit against the NAR and several brokerages. And there was a settlement. And so under the settlement, it was $1.8 billion. Commissions will be subject to more negotiation. So no longer, Jack, can a broker just throw a 6% commission into the MLS as part of the listing agreement. And this report from NPR, it states that commissions could lower this new settlement will lower the cost of buying and selling a home for buyers and sellers. It could also drive some real estate agents out of business, Jack. And so, NAR is one of the most powerful lobbying groups in DC, have been for many years. And I'm sure that this lawsuit, I don't think it came as a surprise to them, as I think, they've been a target for a while. However, I can imagine where a lot of real estate agents are feeling a little sold out right now. So I'd love to get your take on that, as well as our guest's take, who we'll introduce in a bit.
Yeah, so so NAR negotiated this, like you said, the NAR negotiated this settlement. I think it was $441 million for them specifically. They left the 90 top real estate brokerages kind of still hanging in the wind, with them having the option to kind of buy into the settlement terms on a pro rata basis. But if you were, I think it was over $2 billion of commissions annually or more, you weren't covered by this settlement. So it was just NAR kind of getting the little brokerages in itself out of the fire, out of the line of fire. And yeah, as you mentioned, the days of listing agents going in and saying, hey, we're going to sell we're going to make 6% available for commissions. And yes, there's a co-op for buyer's agents, and here's how much it is. That's going to be going by the wayside. There's tons of so when you go, what that mechanically means is that when you go into the MLS, there's not going to be a spot for the buyer's agent commission. That's going to be negotiated.
Which essentially locks the buyer into a commission structure that they didn't necessarily agree to. That's sort of what was the crux of the lawsuit.
Yeah, and so now what the buyer's agent is going to get paid is going to be negotiated between the buyer and the buyer's agent. And now it doesn't preclude the seller from offering seller help in order to help pay the buyer's commission, but that's going to be an individually negotiated thing. And it's going to be more often the case that the buyer's agent has to have a, somewhat awkward, somewhat more confrontational than they've been used to conversation with their client. So the impetus on the buyer's agent to explain their value proposition is at a higher bar now. Before it was the case that the seller was going to pay for the buyer's agent. And so if you were a buyer, you weren't price sensitive because the industry was kind of forcing a standard number. And frankly, and in those cases where it was the buyer's agent had an easy go of it, subsidizing the other side of the table. And so if you're a buyer, though, in that environment, there's been absolutely no incentive to negotiate that. And frankly, your incentive has been to find the best, highest service buyer's agent out there, because the seller's going to pay it, and the seller's put enough money up there for you to be able to demand a super high level of service from your buyer's agent. So you got buyer's agents doing showings on nights and weekends. You can call them at 11 o'clock and write your offer. And they'll take you in their car and look at 150 houses. Exactly. And that's all just been taken for granted. But now that the seller is not just standing there with their wallet open and you actually have to have a commercial conversation with your between buyer and buyer's agent, I think there's lots of speculation that a lot of other models may emerge to to fill the various different levels of service that a buyer may need, right?
Yeah. Well, let's talk quick. I mean, the thing that I think is interesting about it is that, look, most buyers now, I think, are finding these houses as they sit at work. I'm sitting at work, I'm looking for a house. I jump on one of the online services, Redfin, Zillow, pick yours, and I see several houses that I want. That's a departure, obviously, from meet with a buyer's broker, realtor, and they set up a search for me in the MLS and I start getting houses. I think that model has probably changed almost 180, Jack, over the last 10 years, let's say, and specifically of late, as those services, online services, become far more robust. And so I wonder about the traditional role of a buyer's agent at this point, and how that's really going to change the landscape.
Yeah, I could now there's folks there's buyer's agents who are like, hey, yeah, increased competition, no sweat, my value proposition super solid, like bring it on. And then there's folks who are like, and frankly probably a lot of the part-timers who liked being the person who had access. They'd get a call from some friends when they wanted to see something. They'd go at 7 o'clock at night after work and after their day job and open the door, show them some houses, write up a contract, and boom, get a $15,000 commission, for their friends, and like pull in an extra 30, 40, 50 grand a year, just kind of doing little side hustle work at nights. And that's going to be, but now the buyer, with that not being like definitely paid for by the seller, and that being like real money all of a sudden, right? That's going to be a harder gig to keep going. You're going to have to, buyers are not going to want to show buyers agents are not going to want to show buyers houses without an exclusive buyers representation agreement signed, because they don't know that the seller is going to be willing to pay their commission or what their contribution might be.
Yeah. Chris, and you feel free to jump in here. One of the things that any settlement like this does is it sort of opens the door for an additional lawsuit, or perhaps a different way of looking at the model. And traditionally, the seller is the person sitting there with the money, right? Hopefully, the equity in the property that pays the 6% commission. And I'm wondering, if this opens the door to a model where the buyer is essentially going to foot the bill for their side, and where that's going to come from with buyers who traditionally are coming to the table with 3%, and don't really have a whole lot of cash laying around to pay a $15,000 commission.
Well, this is a little bit off of our core business, and let me say, we really appreciate a good broker. We have lots of intermediaries in our lives, and they all create a lot of value, and we love paying them, because usually it's because something good is happening for our business. I guess it occurs to me here that I don't know that the seller was ever really paying for it. It's sort of like, is this happening to me, or is this just happening? I mean, the fact that it's on the seller's side of the settlement statement, it's cost in the deal, and it's showing up in the overall price, and it's going somewhere. And, I think whether you say it's the seller's cost or buyer's cost, it's transactional friction. And I think Jack's point is, there's going to be more pressure to justify that value creation, and what that does to pricing, and where that shows up. I've heard a few strongly held and mutually exclusive arguments about how it's going to go. So I guess we'll just see.
It's definitely going much more towards a model of how commercial real estate is transacted right now, which is that agency agreements are negotiated on a case-by-case basis, on even a deal-by-deal basis. So it's definitely, where the standardization across the industry is moving much more towards the commercial, a much more commercial kind of environment on a going forward basis. So I think it's ultimately good, like, hey, selfishly, I think it's ultimately good for consumers in that I think that it's important that anyone who causes friction in doing business justifies their existence like explicitly, and that there's not some just like, custom that everyone goes along with because you don't want to, ruffle feathers or upset the apple cart. That's not our MO. So I guess, I think it's going to be generally good. I think it's going to not be good for everyone the same though. Right. So I could see, higher end buyers that want to, that are like, hey, I'm educated. I know the houses that I know what I'm looking for. I'm aware of, technology and can go find them. I just need someone to open the door for me, prepare the contract, and like review the home inspection addendum to make sure that I don't screw something up. And they just want some guidance. And I could see them going more towards a like pay for time, pay a junior agent to open doors and pay a senior agent to, hourly, and pay a senior agent to prepare a contract and walk them through the process and pay that out of pocket, right? And be like, hey, I'm $7,000 in fees out of pocket to my buyer's agent, but that would have been a $20,000 commission a year ago. Now, the low end of the market can't afford that idea, though. So are they going to get, is there going to be a disparate impact issue here where like the low end of the market is now like less represented than they already were, right? Like, frankly, 2%, a 2% buyer side on a $180,000 listing barely puts gas in the car, right? So like buyer's agents in the low end of the market are already kind of sucking wind in terms of like, a justifiable, hourly billing rate. And now you're going to put more pressure on that segment. They may just get, more underserved than they already were. So I think there's going to be lots of kind of like different impacts across different segments of the market as well.
Well, 10, 15 years ago, maybe a little longer now, I think it was widely expected that there'd be no such thing as a travel agent anymore. Right. And now, there still are, but they're concentrated in the areas where there's somebody in the equation that really puts a value on what they're doing. Right. You don't need a travel agent to book a plane ticket, but there are whole industries out there. Cruise ship industry is one. And I understand this is the equivalent of the seller side here, but they've said, hey, our whole sales effort, we're going to outsource to travel agents. We don't want to be in that business at all. We'll market and we'll let travel agents do all of our selling. And there's a lot of travel agents out there, doing very well, but that landscape is very different than it was 10, 15 years ago. And I think there's going to be a major disruption for sure. But where it all settles out, I never think these markets, particularly on the lower end, are as efficient as people like to say they are. But over time, I do think the gravity will be where there's value being created, and people vote with their feet and they'll pay for it.
Hey, one last point because I want to hop into the conversation here with Chris about his business. I'm really excited to have him on today. But one last point that I wanted to make that I thought was an interesting one, so I want to make sure we bring it up, is that this could also have a really interesting change in the role on mortgage loan officers, because before, buyers agents were, scouring the market for buyers, or, paying for Zillow and Redfin leads. You're searching on there and you click on the thing and click on the link and you get put in touch with an agent who will go open the door for you. But now, if that becomes less prevalent because it's frankly just a harder business model, like there's just more challenges on the buyer's agent side of things. When you're going to shop for a house, you still need a pre-qual letter. Nothing's changing about that. And so the mortgage loan officer may be the first point of contact on a higher percentage basis going forward. And so there's an opportunity there, for them to also and also given that like the full service is not now, it may not now be the standard, may not be what's expected of all the time. Maybe mortgage loan officers are in a position where they've got a very low cost of acquisition of a customer, and they can provide a la carte services to buyers and pick up some additional revenue, with that single point of contact. it's I'm not aware of like every state's laws, but it is not usually the case where there's a prohibition between being both the licensed mortgage loan officer as well as the licensed real estate agent on the same transaction. And so for licensed LOs, especially those who have like a big a big social presence, there may be an opportunity for them to put pressure on the buyer's agency side of things as well. So I thought that could be an interesting dynamic. It was an argument that I thought, held some water. So be interesting to see as it plays out, as you guys have said.
Certainly a landmark decision indeed. Chris, thank you for jumping in on the conversation there. You are, congratulations, the first guest who ever jumped in before we formally introduced you.